Hello everybody and welcome to RTO Doctor's long-awaited 30 Days, 30 Tips second series with Lauren Hollows from Understand TAE. We're looking forward to sharing an exciting tip night with you this evening, and I'd just like to introduce Lauren very quickly, and she will tell you all about herself and what she's doing these days with Understand TAE and how it will help you with your Trainer and Assessor Currency and professional development.
Hey guys, thank you very much to Raelene and RTO Doctor for having us on. It's been an awesome series of 30 Days, 30 Tips. I'm really happy to be on the show with Raelene, and Understand TAE is all about maintaining trainer competency and currency in a really proactive way. Our passion and our mission is that the quality of vet education is determined by the quality of our vet educators. And so if we can get better trainers and assessors, then we can get better RTOs, we can get better training and assessment.
And less problems with the regulators.
Yes, and it's all about getting in there early and getting in there before there are problems and setting it up right from day one, so that when you do have audits and things like that, if you've got problems, it's certainly not in that area.
And look, honestly speaking, Lauren, in my experience, that seems to be one of the areas where RTOs in particular find it very challenging to just stay on top of trainer and assessor currency and competency, and particularly that clause around vocational learning and development and applying it to their practice.
Absolutely. And look, at the end of the day, trainers can come and go from RTOs. A lot of RTOs nowadays are working with contract trainers or casual trainers. So, you could end up having, even with a small RTO, going through 20, 30, 40 trainers in a year, trying to manage everything you have to manage in an RTO, in addition to then having to deal with 20 or 30 or 40 different people and processes, and the amount of documentation you've got to have with trainer competency and currency. It's a huge task for any RTO.
Absolutely, and of course everything's becoming more and more complex and detailed in terms of what we are required to provide for trainers and assessors. So maybe you can tell us about the top 5 things that you're finding RTOs and CRICOS providers are finding in just trying to put together their trainer and assessor competency and currency.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, definitely the first one is getting that trainer matrix correct. I think that for most trainers and compliance managers, it's a massive bone of contention. Knowing what level of detail to go down into, do I need to cover it off as a qualification, as a unit, as this, that, and the other? They get very, very confused in relation to it. So the first thing that we certainly look at when we go in and work with an organisation is we look at the trainer matrix. At the end of the day, that's got to cover and very clearly demonstrate both the competency and the currency from that industry perspective to start with. And what we're seeing is that for the vast majority of RTOs, they have learned to go down to the unit level now, which is good. But then the regulators have changed the game a little bit, and they now expect you to go down to, at the very minimum, the element level. And we're seeing quite a lot of RTOs in the last couple of, I'd say at least 6 months, that have been asked to go down and cover knowledge, evidence, performance evidence, where they don't hold the actual unit of competency.
Absolutely, and that's something that I'm glad you touched on actually, Lauren, because what we see a lot of is trainers and assessors and RTO owners who will often say, you know what, I've got a diploma of management or I've got a bachelor of business, why can't I just teach a diploma of business, or why can't I just teach, if I've got a bachelor of business or a bachelor of something, why can't I just teach?
Yeah, that lower level.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so mapping down to a lower level is another common area that we see. Somebody says, look, I've got a diploma, I can absolutely teach a Cert 3. I've got a master's degree, I can absolutely teach a diploma. And look, it's not necessarily that we disagree with that, but at the end of the day, we go back to the why. We're very much focused on the why. And so why, as a trainer, do you need to demonstrate actual competency against that unit? Because you're supposed to be deeming competency. So, if you're confident as a trainer that you know all of the skills, then it really shouldn't be an issue for you to be able to sit down and spend 5 minutes on a particular unit and outline how you cover the competency for that particular unit. And what we've got to remember is very much within the AQF, when we talk about that AQF 3 level versus that AQF 5 level, the types of skills that we're dealing with are very different. You know, you've got one is very much that operational level versus, you know, somewhat the more theoretical or the managerial, that side of things. Just as we wouldn't expect, you know, a supervisor to understand all of the details of what, you know, an engineer does, same, you can't automatically assume that somebody who's got that Cert 4 or diploma understands all of the practical skills at the Cert 3 level.
Absolutely. And of course, we get a similar scenario with people who have done a Bachelor of Education or a Master of Education or a PhD even in education. And all of a sudden they start thinking, well, why do I have to do a Certificate 4? Really?
Yeah. And look, it's, you know, again, it's one of those things where we go, look, we totally understand. And there's a lot of similarities. I mean, certainly when it comes to things like facilitation, we'll find that, you know, there's a really solid understanding and there's a very deep and high level of understanding of, you know, how to engage students and how to organize and, you know, do flipped learning and understand the knowledge of, you know, visual, auditory and kinesthetic learners. However, when it comes to that, the assessment side, the compliance conscientiousness side, having the basic understandings of, you know, standard 1.8, which is your principles of assessment, rules of evidence, and, you know, the actual compliance rigor side of things, how to create a TAS, how to undertake industry engagement. Yeah. Those things are very different. Just as, you know, we couldn't go from vocational education to higher education, we can't necessarily automatically go from higher education to vocational education.
Absolutely.
Some similarities, but sources some differences, and it's an opportunity to learn and get better.
Absolutely, and as educators, that is what we do. We have a lifelong journey of learning.
That's right, always moving forward.
Yeah. So what are some of the other more common issues that you come up with?
So look, validation is definitely becoming one of the areas that we're noticing more and more. We've had a lot of audits that have come through lately whereby the regulators are really strongly looking at how RTOs are going about the process of validating. So if, for example, you've got qualifications from trainers from other providers, same as when you get them with a student to make sure that you can issue that credit transfer, you're going through the same process with your trainers to make sure that they've actually held the units of competency and that the certificate was issued validly. Additional to that is also then looking at how you go about validating the industry skills that they're saying that they have as well. So what we're having to work with on a lot of providers now, especially where that currency is kind of starting to become a bit of a question as well, is really looking at how we're going about the process of saying, yes, they have those current industry skills, and how are we evidencing that? So again, it's kind of going back to this idea of, look, we understand that you may have them. A lot of the times the trainers that we deal with, they do have competency, they do have currency. What we don't have is the evidence that supports that. So it's a journey that we have to go through with the trainer and with the RTO to actually help them say, look, at the end of the day, the regulator is doing what they have to do, and that is go in and look at the evidence. I'm sure you know this better than anyone. You go and you look at the evidence. Is it there or is it not?
Yes.
And so it's helping them understand what the regulator's perspective is as well, and how we can find, you know, an option that kind of meets the regulator needs, evidences their competency, evidences their currency, and linking that idea back to, well, look, that is a reassurance for the RTO, it's a reassurance for the trainer. Yes, I do have competency. Yes, I do have currency. And then how do I make a plan to continue to build on that?
Fantastic. And I know at RTO Doctor, we tend to say that currency is really determined by you as an RTO and how you would determine currency if you were assessing an RPL, for example. So some RTOs might label currency for them as being 2 years. Another RTO might label it as being 12 months. It really is determined by them. We say that 18 months to 2 years is really starting to push it in terms of currency. What do you think?
I think that this is where certainly industry engagement becomes a crucial process. So industry engagement is so closely tied to this concept of currency, both within looking at, you know, the trainer competency as a whole and just more broadly within the system. So as part of the industry engagement that RTO should be undertaking, part of that process is, well, look, what do you see as acceptable for trainer currency and things like that? Because certainly if we're working with an RTO that focuses on, you know, marketing and IT and those sorts of industries, our window is going to be an awful lot shorter. Somebody who's been out of IT for 18 months, they're going to be ancient. Whereas with a lot of other industries, you know, 18 months is probably pretty acceptable. So within the training industry, I certainly think, yeah, within that, we'd like to keep it within that 2-year mark, because again, it's about making sure that understanding how things are now. And I don't think there's anyone that would say that, you know, the way that regulators and the way that training and assessment has to occur now is the same as it was 18 months, 2 years ago. It's very different.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the other things that we find every now and again as well, and we find trainers struggling with it, and certainly regulators as well, is this concept of where they have to have registration with a professional body to be able to operate. And those registration requirements for currency and competency are often in conflict with ASQAs. So you've got a registration body on one hand who says you are competent, current and experienced, and on the other hand you've got ASQA saying that you're not. What do you say about that? How do you work with that?
Yeah, look, and this is certainly different. Would it be nice if there was an understanding that having a current certificate was the same as having currency in the industry? I guess where a lot of the regulators approach this standard from is the fact that the renewal process for the vast majority of these registration bodies is more in and around the process of re-signing the application, repaying the fees. So I think a lot of it is really a question of rigor.
Yes.
There's certainly a lot of, you know, registration certificates whereby you might sign to say, yes, I've been in industry or something like that, but you don't actually have to provide evidence. It's quite different from something like a teacher's registration board, whereby there is actually like a review of evidence and, you know, there's requirement for CPD and things like that. Real estate's a really good one where there's that requirement for all of the CPD. So and amongst that, you know, you've got a lot of evidence there to show that you're staying current with your industry. With some of the other industries, it's not the case.
And I know that we worked on one together a few years back in relation to automotive, and we had a trainer and assessor who, according to the registration body, was a qualified mechanic. And yet when it came to ASQA audit time, the auditor determined that they were not competent and sufficiently competent and experienced to be delivering and assessing an automotive qualification. So in those sorts of situations, what would you suggest would be the best way forward?
Yeah, so definitely this is where you need to go through, I think that validation process is really key to it, having a regular validation process. I also think that the vast majority of trainers, as they're going through their kind of day-to-day processes, they are going out and talking to industry. They are going out and looking at what's happening in different workshops. You know, they are involved in, you know, different components of industry and making sure that they're keeping their skills relevant. It goes back to that thing of, well, how are you actually documenting it, you know? A lot of the times when we have these sorts of things happen, they turn around and they go, oh, but I do this, but I do this, but I do this. And I'm like, but that wasn't in your matrix and it wasn't in this document here and there's no reflection of it. And it's not until we've turned around and said no that they come back and then all of a sudden there's all of this extra evidence. So working with somebody like yourself, a really good consultant, or working with an organisation like ours, RTOs can actually understand what the most recent interpretations are from, you know, the regulators and things like that, and so that they can work, again, proactively to make sure that they're staying ahead of the tides. It doesn't have to be an overwhelming, overburdening process. There are simple little things that you can do, but it's about doing them systematically and doing them regularly.
And from what I understand about Understand TAE, because I did see your presentation at the InSources conference in Sydney a few months ago now, I think it was. And I seem to remember that you were saying that often you will work with trainers and assessors and just through a conversation you're able to assist them to identify where they can get that evidence from.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest thing I say to trainers when I start looking at trainer profiles and things like that is, hey, tell me a story. Trainers are amazing storytellers. They have got great stories. They're natural facilitators. They're natural storytellers a lot of the time. So when you actually ask them about a topic, there's all of these amazing things that come out about these experiences that they've had. And so what we then get to do with our audit hat on is we can go, oh, hold on a second. I heard that. I get the feeling there's probably some evidence attached to that. Let me just pull that out and pop that in. So having those two, you know, benefits and those two sides of things, I think works really well. But it's about making sure that the approach is correct. It's got to be from that approach of really looking at, again, why are we doing this? Why do we want trainers who are competent and current? Because we've got trainers who are competent and current, then we're going to have students who are competent and current.
Absolutely. And that takes me back, I guess, to one of the earlier 30 days, 30 tips that we did in this series are about value and perception and what we value as auditors, consultants, as trainers, as RTO owners. And if the RTO owner actually values the investment in their trainers and assessors and the value that they can provide to their students, then they will go that extra distance to really make sure that their trainers and assessors have got the tools necessary to be able to do their jobs.
Yeah.
So what's the next tip that you've got for us, Lauren?
Look, I guess one of the other areas that I think it's probably really important to look at is, as I said, systematic, being proactive. So when we talk about professional development, and when we look at everything like we do, we've got to have a systematic validation system. We've got to have a systematic way of reviewing our training and assessment strategies. In the same way, you've got to have a systematic approach for managing trainer professional development. Now, what that means and what we see that being interpreted as most audits is that you've got to be able to show very clearly what you've done over the last 12 months to cover all of those relevant things. And you've got to have a plan for what you're actually going to do over the next 12 months as well. The fact of the matter is that time goes by so quickly. Nowadays, it just seems to fly by. I can't believe we're looking at September tomorrow. That's insane to me. But a lot of RTOs do leave professional development to the last minute. And so what we see is this kind of no PD, no PD, no PD, no PD, no PD. Everyone gets plumbed into PD. There's an audit. No PD, no PD, no PD, no PD, no PD. Yeah. So it's really got to be, systematic. So you've got to actually have an approach to how you're going to cover all of those things. We also believe that when it comes to that vet side of PD, you've got to cover off a range of areas. So you've got to cover off training, assessment, and compliance. And specifically when we talk about assessment, it's got to be around competency-based assessment. So making sure that when you're talking about vet PD, it can't just be, oh, I've sent them to one session, they've done, a day on an update on the standards, and then we can tick the box. Again, there's got to be a very clear plan as to how you're going to address all those points, in the same way that there's got to be a plan as to how you're going to address all the skills across the qualification that they teach. So having a very clear professional development plan, showing what you've done over the last 12 months, but also having a plan for the next 12 months. And then, like everything else, if you say you're going to do something, you've got to do it.
Absolutely. Tell me about another tip that you've got, and I'm just going to go back to the emails that I've got from some of our followers to remind me about a question that I had to ask you. But I can also see on the screen, and I haven't got my glasses with me, a question from one of our followers. What about validating the cert for
assessors can actually do their job and their interpretation of the assessment criteria is correct? That's from Steve Robinson. Okay, so awesome question, Steve. How are trainers and assessors interpreting? This comes back to your validation process and your industry engagement process. So industry engagement is just related to so much of what we do in our business. It's not funny. But basically, when you're interpreting your criteria, when you're developing your assessment tools, part of that development process for developing the assessment tools is that you actually go and trial them and you actually check that they're correct. So that industry validation process of, look, this is the assessment that we're looking at doing, this is the outcome that we're looking at getting for our students, and this is how we're interpreting it as the most current industry standard, or this is how we're interpreting it as the outcome that we're supposed to be achieving for industry. That is the conversation that the assessor is having with industry. And through that conversation, you are, one, validating that the trainer and assessor is actually working and engaging with industry, but you're also validating the fact that your trainer is able to interpret the most current industry standards correctly. And then it's partially, I guess, working with your compliance team or consultants like Raelene and things like that to make sure that that interpretation is going to line up as closely as possible to the regulators. You also have to be okay with sometimes turning around to the regulator and saying, no, hold on a second. We've undertaken the industry engagement. We've worked with the professionals. We've got really qualified trainers and assessors. This is how we're interpreting it. This is the evidence we've got to support that. And being comfortable with that decision and not just turning around to the regulator and going, oh, well, if you're calling it that way, then that's what we'll accept it as. Not, every auditor can't be a professional, have a full understanding of every training package. It's not possible. So you've got to be comfortable with the decisions that you make. And I know certainly Raelene probably has a lot more to say about that on that topic than I do, because you would see it a lot more.
I do see it quite frequently, actually, Lauren, you're right. And I am probably very well known to remind auditors that perhaps that is more an opinion than an actual correct interpretation of a clause of the standards for RTOs 2015 or even the ESOS Act or whatever they're trying to apply.
But you've got to have your evidence to back it up.
Absolutely. You do need to have evidence, and you do need to sometimes stand firm and say, well, that might be your opinion, but it is just an opinion, and we have this evidence. This is what we believe. This is how we've interpreted it. And really, it's incumbent upon the auditor at that point to prove you wrong.
Yeah. And when you do have problems, that's when you give somebody like Raelene a call and she'll give you a hand.
Now, I can also see another comment there. Oh, thanks, Steve. Thanks, ladies, from Steve. Awesome. And welcome to Craig also, who has joined us. Now, one of the other things that I've got here is why aren't subscriptions on LinkedIn enough?
Oh, because I get magazines and I get this and I get this and I get all this information coming at me, and so of course I must be current. Look, yeah, this is another common one that comes up all the time, and certainly the way that we handle it through our trainer development system is that we go, look, that's great, guys, that you're getting all this information, but it's, you know, if we're talking about being lifelong learners, like you said, and continually going on a path, we actually have to show engagement with our materials. So just like we have to show engagement with industry, we have to show engagement with our professional development. So if you're going to be, if you're on LinkedIn, then that's fantastic. But comment on LinkedIn and talk about the interactions that you've had, or take screenshots or something along those lines to show that you're participating in those conversations. We have, when I work with trainers, we get trainers who often get lots of industry magazines and things like that. What they might do is they might then send out an email summary to some of their counterparts and things like that, going, hey guys, read this article, really interesting. Here were the kind of 2 or 3 key takeaways from me, and we can use that as well. When we do professional development with Understand TAE with any RTO, we send out a reflection form afterwards. And there's 3 questions in that reflection form. What did you actually learn from it? How can you go out? What's like the key takeaway? And how are you going to use that information to apply it to make you a better practitioner? That reflection process is absolutely so crucial, because what that actually shows at the end of the day is that you've used that content to make you a better trainer, a more relevant trainer, and to get a better outcome for your students. That's what the standards are about. They're about improving the quality of training and assessment. And so that's what we want your PD to be showing.
And of course, that is the evidence that they need to be demonstrating for vocational teaching and learning.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, I've lost it again. One of the other areas that, just to finish up on that one, actually, Lauren, just wanting to confirm with you again, just because you receive a journal by subscription in the mail every week, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've done anything with it. It doesn't even mean that you've even opened it up out of the plastic, and that's why it's not considered professional development.
Yeah.
And just because you are a member of a group on LinkedIn that may be relevant to vocational education and training or CRICOS providers or something, it doesn't mean that you've actually done anything as part of that group. It just means that you're a member.
Yeah.
So what people tend to say in relation to those LinkedIn groups as well is that they are almost like a peer review process in itself. And so the discussions that take place, they're conversations where peers are sort of scaffolding on each other's opinions, and yeah, that's a great idea. No, this wouldn't work because of this reason. Actually, no, that opinion's not correct. This is the correct interpretation, or I've been in an audit, and you get the idea.
Yeah. And look, it can be very, there's a lot of people that we talk to that are actually afraid to post questions and things like that on LinkedIn because it is their profile, and they worry about the fact that if they ask a question, they're going to go, oh, people assume that my RTO doesn't know what we're doing, or this, that, or the other.
All the regulators watching.
The regulators watching, Big Brother's watching, all these sorts of things. Look, at the end of the day, I think that if you want to go out and you're going to ask a question to try and be a better trainer and assessor, absolutely go for it. As I said, we're all on this path of lifelong learning. I know that, you know, you spend hours doing professional development a week. I spend hours doing professional development a week. It's about having to consistently push ourselves to be better. And I think that when RTOs show that to the regulators, that they are working hard and that they are trying to do the right thing, that there's a different approach. The whole idea behind the student-centered approach was that, you know, you actually look at what the RTO is doing, not the fact that they've just got a range of policies and procedures. And, you know, it's about doing everything that you can, but learning what the most current interpretation is so that you can evidence it correctly, and doing it in a way that is a little bit all the time rather than, you know, 7 weeks of massive prac before you have your re-reg order or something like that.
You're absolutely right, Lauren, because what I'm finding still today, despite the fact that these standards were introduced as a result of all this confusion about interpretation, and let's not make the standards so grey, but let's have them black and white. What I actually find with some of my audits that I go to and some of the rectification reports that I have to deal with is that there is just still so much grey.
Yeah.
Still so much grey. One of the other areas that I had on the list, Lauren, is around conflict of interest in training and assessment. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I've got a trainer, and if I've got to go down to the level of performance evidence and knowledge evidence and things like that, and TAC is really big on this at the moment. There was Stephanie Trestrail came out and she said, look, you don't hold that unit of competency, you're going to do basically a full RPL process. RTOs have just turned around and gone, well, it's going to be easier for me just to RPL the whole qualification, and then they hold the competency and I don't have to argue anymore. Now, the problem is that a lot of RTOs turn around and go, well, I'm just going to do it myself because that's a lot easier. There's a couple of problems in and around that. Look, if you want to do it, absolutely go for it. There's nothing against the standards that says that you can't do it. However, I'll tell you right now, from what I've seen, and you can probably back me up on this, it's the first file that gets audited.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely the first file that gets audited. And when you're asking your trainers to assess their peers and their colleagues, it's really hard for them to maintain bias through that process. So certainly when I look at setting up these sorts of things, I will recommend, look, let's go out and talk to another RTO. Let's see whether or not, you know, they've got trainers in the same bucket, and we can actually look at, we'll assess them and they'll assess us. And that way there's that, you know, separation. And so your trainers are far more likely to hold them to the proper level of rigor. The other part of that is that, I'll be honest, I still find the vast majority of trainers and assessors don't understand RPL very well. Absolutely. RPL kits are generally a point of weakness in most RTOs, and therefore when we actually start looking at it in relation to standard 1.8, do they actually meet the rules of evidence for everything there?
Not usually.
We often come up with no. So.
And look, my experience around RPL as well is that there are some RPL providers out there who are still living in the 60s and 70s, and they just haven't moved with the times in terms of the process of assessment and what's required under the standards. So what worked for evidence collection in an RPL kit, for argument's sake, you know, 10, 15 years ago, doesn't necessarily work today.
Yeah,
and so
even 2-3 years ago.
Absolutely. You need to be really careful about the types of evidence collection tools that you're using for the RPL process. That's really important as well. And not to mention as well, in terms of conflict of interest in training and assessment, great suggestions that you had there. RTO Doctor also has a conflict of interest in training and assessment kit that we often work with providers to try and support them in developing a management plan for being able to manage that conflict of interest.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it comprises a few documents. If that's something that people are interested in, I'm happy to provide a discount based on today's session for that. Just get in touch, and happy to refer those people on to you as well, just so that you can work with them to complete that management kit.
Yeah.
I can see we've got another comment there.
Oh, okay, here we go.
Oh, we got two.
Okay, so RPL is sometimes seen as a long-winded process. Yep, we can totally address that. And it appears to many that it's easier to do a challenge assessment. Okay, so yes, we have, I know a lot of RTOs, and I think I've actually said this, turned around and said this to myself when I've looked at getting qualifications. I've gone, just assess me. Just assess me. I don't want to spend 27 hours collecting evidence to have to go through the RPO process. Give me the assessment. I'll fill it out. It's fine. Come and see me do it. It's all good. Yeah, there's a lot of RTOs that want to do that as well. And look, it's at the end of the day, it's going to be what's easier for you. It's depending on the qualification. But there are sometimes situations whereby you might be the only person providing that qualification in the country, or there might only be 2 providers in the country. So you've got no choice but to RPL yourself, or to, I would imagine you've got to be super careful assessing your own staff.
Absolutely, and that was really the conflict of interest in training assessment that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So we do sell a kit of documents to assist you to manage that, and we'd be happy to work with Understand TAE to be able to implement that.
I'm guessing authenticity is the big one there, where you've got a trainer that's like basically had access to all of the marking guides for the last 2 years.
Absolutely. But what I also wanted to say in relation to that comment about being such a long-winded process, that goes back to that concept that I was saying before, where many RPL, many people who sell RPL kits out there are still living 10, 15 years ago, and that's what makes the RPL process so long-winded.
Yeah.
People who actually are current and experienced in the vocational education training sector, and particularly with the standards for RTOs 2015, they have a really good understanding that people just don't want to be filling out 30, 40-page documents and collecting evidence for months on end just to be able to get a qualification or a skill set or even a unit of competency anymore. And so that model for developing an evidence collection tool, if you like, has just gone out the window, but sadly that's all that people know. And because that's all they know, they're still trying to offer that to their clients, but it's just not working anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think RPL is one of those things, we could probably do a whole episode on this. It's one of those things where, like, the people who I've seen that have done it really well have done it amazingly, but they've been super niche. So I know that when I was running AAOWT, we did, reflexology and massage, and we had a lot of nurses come in. So we went through our whole qualification, reduced all of the duplication. So we did basically a cluster of like 10 units in one go. We mapped the nursing standards into all of those sorts of things. And so that was a very specific, process that we put together. The people that I see that do it really well, they utilize clustering beautifully. They know exactly the market that they're doing this for. So it's generally quite niche. But when you do it effectively and you actually have a really good tool and you know the market that you're doing it for, which is what you're supposed to do when you have a training assessment strategy anyway, it can be done and it can be amazing. It can be just such a great, easy process for the person to go through. It doesn't have to be
long-winded, and it can be absolutely meaningful, not just to the person completing the RPL process, but it can also be meaningful to the RTO in how to improve their own RPL process. It can be meaningful for the trainer and assessor as well, in terms of there could be cross-learning that takes place there. So RPL, you're right, we could spend an entire episode covering up on RPL. So going back to our tips, what are some other tips? I've got to get back to my notes here, but
look, in and around trainer currency, so we've covered off systematic, we've covered off making sure you go down to the right level of detail. I've got to absolutely stress that, guys. You've got to go down to the right level of detail. When we talk about vet PD, for some reason we're still getting confusion around the fact of, do I have to have the TAE 16? What do I have to have in relation? What's my process? So I just want to quickly go on stage and clarify. You do not have to have TAE 16 yet. Those people who are flashing that up and marketing that on LinkedIn and Facebook and saying, you have to have the 16 now, it's coming out, it's come out in the standards, they're wrong. You don't have to have anything until March 2019, for starters. And you can have the TAE 16, but there's also an option to have the 10 along with the the LLN unit, which I find the vast majority of trainers have already, and TAE ASS 502B.
Develop assessment.
When I talk to RTOs about that, I implore them, I will literally get down on my hands and knees and beg them, please find a good provider to deliver that unit to. Spending 2 or 3 solid days face-to-face actually teaching your trainers how to design a proper training and assessment tool, how to do RPL properly. I can guarantee you as an RTO owner, if you're an RTO owner out there, it will be the best money you ever spend outside of, you know, maybe hiring me, all right? You know, it's such a worthwhile process. Find a good provider because the trainers will get so much out of it. If they have gone from the BS Ed to the TAA to the TAE and now they've got to upgrade again, give them the time, invest in them, allow them to actually go and really look at what is the current requirements, how do we do this properly, how have things changed in the last couple of years, and give them the time to build that knowledge back.
And just on that point, you may remember, I think it was about a week ago now, I did a 30 days, 30 tips session on ASQA's Naughty List. And on ASQA's Naughty List are a whole range of providers who are known to, particularly at the moment with the whole TAE amendment to scope process, there's a whole list of providers whose names are on that list as this particular RTO has delivered the most ridiculous TAE qualification under the sun. And so if they open up your HR files and they look at your trainer and assessor qualifications and see that your trainers and assessors are from there, and you've got very little PD in terms of trainer and assessor type PD, ASQA are going to come down on you like a ton of bricks because that naughty list, it's there, people. It's not a figment of anyone's imagination. It is there.
No, and look, and several of the states are going down the same track. I mean, Victoria, I know that the Victorian contract expressions of interest opened up today. Victoria's been asking for the list of trainers and assessors for years. They know the good ones and the bad ones. WA, I've had talks with the WA government. They're looking at the same thing. They know, they see when trainers go from 1 to 1 to 1 to 1 to 1. And there is just so much more focus now coming in and around really looking at the trainers because, guys, you can have the most compliant assessment tools in the world. You can have the best resources. You can have top-notch facilities. You can give all of that to 2 trainers and one will deliver this absolutely brilliant standout training and then the other one will get no outcomes for your students whatsoever. The quality of training boils down to the quality of the trainer and assessor, and we have got to invest in trainers and assessors. And I hate to tell you guys, but I would be all for a registration system because at the end of the day, I can confidently put my hands up and say that, you know, I meet the standards and I actually want to exceed them because I want to be able to turn around and say, you know what, we're an industry, we set our own standards, it's actually above the RTO standards.
Absolutely. I can see we've got another comment there. We're wondering about the new TAE. That's from Glenda. Glenda, we've just addressed that. If you're still with us, can you just confirm via a like or a thumbs up or maybe put the number 9 in the comments if you are okay with that answer? Yep, thanks. Fantastic. Thanks, Glenda. So the last one that I had on my list, Lauren, and you might have some more, but the last one on my list from RTO Doctor followers is around this concept of supervision.
Yeah. Don't do it. The first thing that I say is just don't do it. You are so look, there's a couple of reasons why we say don't do this. One is because purely from an operational perspective, I find it very hard to believe that you can have 2 trainers sitting in a room and from a financial viability perspective, make it work. I haven't seen it happen before. There's so much that RTOs need to be doing nowadays. We don't make a whole lot of profit, like RTOs don't make a whole lot of profit. Absolutely. As it is. If you're making like 40, 50% profit out there, I'm hesitant to say it, but I think you're doing something wrong. So that's one reason why. 2 is that it just becomes really messy in relation to, it's hard enough to ensure that 1 trainer and assessor, you've got all of the documentations to make that meet. Try to then do that across 2 trainers and assessors, it becomes even more difficult because you start getting into situations whereby, you know, who is actually generally doing the assessing. It's a sad point, but unfortunately a lot of trainers and assessors nowadays, or the regulator when they're looking at it, they don't take everything at face value. And so there's certainly, I've seen RTOs that have gotten picked up whereby they said that they were training under supervision, but, you know, really it was just an additional signature after the fact. In fact, I think that one of the articles that came out in the Australian last week was specifically around that point of, you know, assessor stuff was getting signed off after the fact and the assessor wasn't doing it. That's totally going to get picked up at audit, guys. Like, they talk to the students now, they talk to the assessors. Don't do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, I'm sure there are ways that you can make it work, but if that was the track that you really felt you needed to go down, my strong recommendation would be to make sure that you've got an incredibly strong policy and procedure, make sure that you've got really, really strong controls in and around it, and make sure that you run that not just through your own, but go out and get a couple of external opinions. I would be saying the same thing if you were subcontracting your training and assessment out. Those to me
I think
are
even just
really
monitoring that
areas.
process and getting someone externally to just monitor that on your behalf, because often if it's just a signature or initial or something like that that's missing off that supervision form, it undoes your entire supervision process. We've got another comment there.
Oh, okay. Okay, so training is the cornerstone of our industry. However, the most undervalued, understood, and least financed. That's from Steve Robinson. Yeah, you're right. Don't know how else to say that. Look,
it's also the thing that changes lives, and that's fundamentally why we're all involved.
Yeah.
We're all here to leave a legacy of some sort, and that is the only way that we can really truly do that. And it's that passion and commitment that really drives what we do and our value and perception of training.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. We're totally, this is like a really, we're really passionate about this thing. Yeah, look, unfortunately, training is undervalued. And I think that this is where a lot of the states have started to come in and say, you know, WA brought in that for job seekers, you've got to train 70% of the nominal hours. Victoria has brought in controls through their state funding contracts in and around delivery, like separating the payment of delivery versus the payment of assessment. The regulator, that's a lot of the drive behind, you know, the requirements in and around amount of training and volume of learning is there is an understanding that when you're dealing with, you know, international students or new students or job seekers and things like that, these guys need training. They don't know it. You know, you need to train them before you can assess them. And for a lot of RTOs, it's the assessment process. That's where we get regulated. We get really highly regulated on the assessment. We have done for a very long time. We haven't gotten regulated so much on the training side, and that's what we're seeing coming in. Now, there's a lot of people saying whether they are or aren't taking the right tact, and I know that's a very emotive issue. We're not even going to get into that. But yeah, look, training, unfortunately, trainers, and I think to some extent trainers are undervalued as well. And this is where, certainly from Understand TAE's perspective, that's why that is our lives, is helping RTOs to understand the value that a good trainer and assessor has. We work with a lot of contract trainers as well. And the reason why we work with contract trainers is because, you know, you guys as contract trainers, you're not supported at all. You're like, oh, contract trainer, like I'm not going to even stress. From an RTO, from a lot of RTOs' perspectives, there are good RTOs that are good to their contract trainers. But it's about valuing the great trainer and that process of imparting knowledge. And that's why when we look at PD, we look at the facilitation process as well as the compliance, as well as the assessment, because our industry is about a beautiful combination of all of those things. And so the more we learn to support our trainers and assessors, the more we facilitate good training and assessment.
Absolutely. And it's really important to remember too that in a system where vocational education and training, generally speaking, is undervalued, and it's not just the vet system where that is undervalued, but it's throughout Australia entirely. It is, I've said this before and I'll say it again, it is probably the most scrutinised sector of any sector in the Australian qualifications framework. And it is so undervalued by government. You can see it just merely by looking at the Education Services Post-Secondary Education Award. You know, the cost per hour or annual salary that's been allocated as a minimum wage for trainers and assessors in the vet sector is really undermining the value that they can contribute to any anybody's future and career and so forth.
I mean, we sometimes pay childcare is better than we pay childcare trainers and assessors, and that's, you know, look, that's sad. But again, look, that's another reason why I think we need to value our trainers and assessors, and that would be, you know, why things like putting that focus on trainers and assessors. I know it's a stress for RTOs, and I know for some trainers it's a stress as well, but guys, this is a good thing. Like, at the end of the day, the more we invest in our trainers, the more that RTOs are forced to invest in their trainers, the benefit pays off tenfold. It makes our industry better, you know, and we should be turning around and saying, we're an industry. We so often forget as RTOs, we are an industry. We are part of the education industry. And if we want to turn around and say, you know what, we know that there's the standard here, we're setting the benchmark here because we want to be better. We know we're better. And, you know, despite the fact of all the bad and negative publicity that we've received, the vast majority of trainers and assessors, the vast majority of vet practitioners out there want to do the right thing. We're in it because we want to make a difference, and we should absolutely celebrate that. Absolutely.
So, Lauren, one last tip from Understand TAE before you tell us about your fantastic system and how it works.
Be systematic. Be proactive. You know, like, I know that I think this applies to everything, but guys, you've got to have a plan and you've got to stick to it. You know, you've got to take that time. If it's once a year, if it's every 6 months, whatever it is, you know, in the same way that you've got to plan out your validation, you've got to plan out what you're doing with your trainers and assessors. Their time for your organization is so valuable that, you know, you absolutely want to make sure that the time that they're not doing training and assessment or marking or doing student support or something of that nature, you want to make sure that you know what they're doing, you've got a plan for what they're doing, and you're going to help them get through all of that. So you've got to be proactive.
Fantastic. And tell us a little bit about the Understand TAE system. And I understand you've got a discount offer for our followers today.
Absolutely. So anyone who contacts us for the next 4 days, if you mention RTO Doctor or our live Facebook session, we will give you a 10% discount on any of the products or services that you want to buy. The trainer development system was born out of the frustrations of trainers and compliance and, you know, professionals and God knows how many audits that were undertaken by myself and my partner at the time. We went through so many audits and we just kept on seeing the same things, and we said, you know what, there's got to be a better way. And as trainers and assessors are starting out as ourselves, we figured out what that was. So the trainer development system is basically a very proactive system which assesses what the trainer's capabilities are. We do that through our vet practitioner assessment. We figure out where they sit in relation to their industry currency, their facilitation skills, assessment skills, and compliance skills. And then we put together a really comprehensive plan, and we deliver a lot of like micro training, and we align them with micro training with a range of organizations, and then we organize reflection on that. So it's about finding ways of making training work, understanding the very, very busy schedules that our trainers operate under, and making sure that the training is contextualized. We shouldn't be providing one session to 60 trainers that we have within an organization. We're all unique, we're all different, we're all at different levels. So we've got to provide training and assessment just like we do to our students at their level. We need to provide it to trainers at our level, and we want to make sure that every PD experience that trainers have, they actually really get something out of it, that they feel that it's contextualized and tailored to them, because that's going to allow them to grow.
Absolutely. So if people want to benefit from that discount offer that you've got for them today, Lauren, how do they benefit from that?
They can either go directly onto our website, and when you put it in, you've got the opportunity to put in a promo code, and the promo code is RTODR, RTO Doctor, or you can give us a call, and if you mention it, we'll apply it with your invoice.
Okay, and I will put the link to Understand TAE's website in the comments after the video.
Thank you very much. Thank you again so much to RTO Doctor. Really happy to be working together again. And thank you so much, guys, for all of your questions. We love that we had so many questions.
And if you have any more questions and you didn't want to put them on the Facebook Live video, please don't hesitate to send them through on either the RTO Doctor website or the Understand TAE website, and we'll make sure that we get those answered for you as anonymously and confidentially as possible. And if the response is relevant to a range of people, obviously we will de-identify, and we'll make sure that that information goes out to everyone. So just in terms of the RTO Doctor discount offer for this particular tip session today, just a reminder that we will give people a discounted offer on the conflict of interest in training and assessment kit. And if that's something of interest to you, please don't hesitate to contact us through the website, and I'll be able to forward you some information in relation to that. So thank you once again, Lauren, for your precious time today. It's been a very lengthy 30 days, 30 tips. Thank you to everyone who has joined us live, and thank you to those of you who will join us later when we're not live. I know that we do have a lot of followers who watch these videos after the event. So thank you very much, and bye for now.
Thanks, guys.